Welcome back. Welcome back. It's Ed Martin here in the Pro America Report. Our next guest is our old friend John Schlafly, and John Schlafly is, well, he's half of the dynamic duo John and Andy Schlafly. Published the weekly column, the Schlafly Report, available at townhall.com, our sister website, and also they're always archived at phyllisschlafly.com. This week's is called Anti-Trump Book Channels Farcical Faulkner. Now, John, this is probably as, in a way, it's perfect example of the degeneration of American kind of academic culture, in my opinion. This woman, Mary Trump, who is President Trump's niece, she's a PhD, I guess, in psychology, and she's now written like a psychological analysis, a psychological analysis of the president. Does that walk us through who this is and what she's up to, John Schlafly?
Yes, well, she has a PhD in psychology, and of course that's, first of all, that pretty much defines her right there. But she's a clinical psychologist, and she has been estranged from the whole Trump family, really. But before she became a psychologist, she apparently was an English major in college, and she became obsessed with the writings of William Faulkner. Now, Faulkner was a kind of has a literary reputation. He was given the Nobel Prize in Literature, the Pulitzer Prize, the Book Award, and everything else. And his works are unreadable, really. And I know that my co-author, my brother Andy, is still smarting from being forced to read books by Faulkner. and the idea that someone would be so obsessed with Faulkner's fictional family that she would interpret her own family as if she herself is living in the fictional family that was written about in several books by William Faulkner. And she's, of course, interpreting her uncle, Donald Trump, in light of the fiction written by Faulkner. And that's basically what her new book appears to be, according to advance reports. So, but naturally, the media is going to town with it, and as if she's telling the real truth about...
Well, but John, let me ask you...
Yeah.
And as a pullback and observer, there's always been tell-all books about everybody, right? That's the valet for Prince something or other, or Princess Diana's chauffeur. It's kind of a tradition, but in this case, the thing that makes me kind of smile is it's almost like the perfect coming together. Yes, it's a tell-all book about someone who was in the room with her uncle quite a bit, you have to assume, but it's now like proposed as if, for years they've been saying, armchair psychologists or psychiatrists saying, ooh, we haven't been able to examine Donald Trump, but we make a diagnosis of this, that, or the other thing, right? Now they have a woman who's a psychologist in the family who's making the diagnosis of how neurotic she thinks he is. John, is this the bottom of the barrel at this point? We are down to the bottom of what the media is doing, or is this just sort of standard tabloid fare in your mind?
Well, it's whether we've hit bottom, Ed, is anybody's guess. There's 4 months to go, and I think there's more scraping of the bottom that we can expect. And for those of your senior listeners, Ed, may remember the Goldwater Rule, because when Goldwater ran for president in 1964, a bunch of psychologists took out a full-page ad declaring that Goldwater was mentally unfit to be president, and
that's right.
They were reprimanded by their profession and saying that was inappropriate for a psychologist to psychoanalyze somebody they had never even met. Now, of course, Mary did meet her uncle, but truthfully, Ed, she was undoubtedly more affected by her own father. That is, Donald Trump's brother. Now, Donald has talked about the sad case of his older brother who died basically of alcoholism in his 50s. And it was a sad story. And that was, Donald has said that watching his older brother is what motivated Donald to never touch alcohol during his entire life, which is remarkable. People don't talk about that. I don't know when we last had a president of the United States who was a teetotaler for his whole life, as Donald Trump has been. So that's a story in itself that is worthy of attention. But, of course, Mary is a liberal. She admits she voted for Hillary, and that's what's motivating this, along with the publishing industry and the media and everything else.
And we're talking with John Schlafly. The Schlafly Report, again, is over at townhall.com. And, John, stay with the media for a second. At this point, don't you know, and maybe this is me talking about myself, and you're less likely to agree, but, all right, I'll say it that way. I think I meet people, and I can tell within a couple of minutes if they're a heavy watcher of CNN or Fox. that they're now programmed in such a way. I'll give you my Fox example. I'm watching the Mount Rushmore speech, and across the bottom in a ticker it says, Trump confronted by protesters at Mount Rushmore. Now, by chance, I tuned in an hour and a half early to that speech, and I couldn't find it, so I put it on my phone on streaming, like right side broadcasting, and they covered on a handheld device the quote-unquote confrontation with protesters. It was like 24. I mean, I've been to protests. I've been to tea parties. It was 24 people. It wasn't even a real protest. And yet Fox covered it like we, the viewers, should be appalled that he was confronted by protesters. My point, John, is we've got now, I don't know, 2/3 of the country that are being just browbeaten into their position by the news media. Isn't that, am I wrong about that? And what's it mean for an election?
Well, our country is spinning apart, Ed, in a number of different ways. It's alarming, really. I mean, you've cited one example, but what we've witnessed in the streets over the last couple months, the way the media is basically we divided into two Americas now. It's not sectional as it was 150 years ago, but we seem to be spinning apart, and it's not good because our founding fathers gave us the office of president, which has to be filled by one person. And,
right.
They considered having a committee, and they rejected that idea. And that one person has to have a majority, not just a plurality, in the Electoral College. And we're facing this. It's rushing right at us at breakneck speed. And we don't even know if we're going to be able to conduct an election because we don't even know if people will be able to cast their ballots. And it takes a lot of, it's an awful, we need to think seriously about what's facing us in the next couple of months. And the latest thing, you probably saw that the senior columnist at the New York Times has published an article in all seriousness, Tom Friedman, saying that Joe Biden should simply refuse to debate President Trump unless he stipulates conditions that are ridiculous. So they're afraid of putting Biden out for debate with Trump. And they had to start that.
Yeah, they had to start down this path because Karen Tumulty formerly of Time Magazine, maybe she's now there, and Washington Post, she started 10 days ago with that story. I didn't see Friedman until you just said it. I pulled it up. But they had to start down that path because the only path right now for Joe Biden, to be able to succeed is to be imaginary to the voters as the media is the enemy against Trump. And so they say, oh, Trump is exhausting, Trump is antagonistic, Trump is this. There's a guy in the basement over there, and he's a real nice fella. People say he's a nice fella because if they let him out, it becomes a choice. It's like Dukakis in the tank or H.W. Bush. The contrast head to head was damning for Dukakis. But John, does it work? I mean, again, you've been around presidential politics closely observing for since the mid '70s. Is it going to work because of the power of the media and because of the nature of our electorate right now? Do you think it's and if it's not going to work, why?
Well, as Steve Bannon commented recently, let's not forget that Donald Trump is the president of the United States. He does have powers as president, and he's really not using his presidential powers as much as he can, and as much as he should do. Every day he could take action as president that will require news coverage and demand public attention. The Biden can't do that. And so, as Steve Bannon said, Trump would simply act as president every day and let the campaign take care of itself, and the media will have to follow what Trump does as president. That's what I'd suggest.
Yeah, I don't know, John. If you got all the way this far as President Trump, as Donald Trump, every time somebody said, act differently and it'll work, maybe. I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe this is when he finally should do that. But if you're him, it's like being a major league ball player. It's like being the greatest hitter ever in the history of baseball. And somebody saying, don't be quite so aggressive now. Now, maybe that's true, right? Maybe Ted Williams in the last 3 years of his time in the major leagues would be less aggressive because he knew he didn't have the same pop. I don't know. But it's hard to get a top athlete at that level to change their approach, I think. I mean, and I think if he did in the wrong way, it might not be effective. I'm not sure. Well, that's an interesting one. All right, John, we got to run, unfortunately. John Schlafly, half of the the Schlafly Report with his brother Andy, and we'll be back together. We'll have him back on next week. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, we'll take another quick break and be right back. It's Ed Martin here on the Pro America Report. Be right back.